How similar is Paris to September 11th, and how will France respond to this latest terrorist crisis? Next on the Academics. Hello, I'm Paul Gates of Appalachian State's Department of Communication. Welcome to the Academics. Please meet our panel. To my right, Nancy Love of the university's Government and Justice Studies Department, and Michael Wade of Appalachian's History Department. Paris and the September 11th responses. Is there a similarity? Are we seeing something like that already, a difference that you can discern in the way the two nations have responded to the latest attacks?
Yeah, I think the difference was immediate. In 2001, President Bush encouraged Americans to go on living their lives as usual. And expressed concern about an economy paralyzed by fear of terrorists. And he said this: "I ask your continued participation and confidence in the American economy." A week later, he said, "Fly and enjoy America's great destination spots. Get on down to Disney World in Florida. Take your families and enjoy life the way we want it to be enjoyed."
So don't let this interfere with the economy.
Yeah. Right. Did we do that, Nancy?
Well, I don't think we did. And I actually think that we have, to a great extent, over the past decade plus, traded considerable liberty for a false sense of security, perhaps, with initiatives like the Patriot Act, the Homeland Security Department. And what I'm curious about in terms of France's response so far is whether they are less likely to lose their way and may actually remind us of ours. And I'm struck by the comments of President Hollande that this was an attack on the values we defend all over the world, and that which we are, a free country that speaks to the entire planet. And then also President Obama's comment that this was an attack on all of humanity and the universal values we share. This seems to be something that the United States needs to be reminded of, not to sacrifice our liberty, not to sacrifice our humanity in the wake of terror.
And so this is being painted, the Paris attacks, more as an attack on culture, French culture, humanity as a global entity, but Paris being singled out, for France being singled out for an attack on their way of life on a Friday night. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say, Mike?
Oh, I think so. I was struck by what Nancy said. The euro, of course, has taken over currencies, but French currency before the euro. We have politicians on our money. The French have artists, cultural treasures. Our focus on culture in this country, to put it kindly, is quite diffuse. We talk more about lifestyles than we do culture, and the French are simply, they're more focused on their national culture and its value. The French response to these attacks was to bomb the Syrian headquarters of ISIS. Our response was to go after a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. As for France in general and the Parisians in particular, it seems clear that neither the government nor the French people intend to succumb to this political hysteria. I brought a cartoon along, and I wonder if if you'll would like if we could see it. I think it speaks volumes. Yeah, there we are. If a picture's worth 1,000 words, I think this is a good example. I don't know.
That was I think my point with an attack on culture. I mean, the cartoon represents people in Paris doing what Parisians do at the sidewalk cafe, and they are regarding this in the foreground there, the sign that identifies this little neighborhood cafe as part of a war zone. This is French culture that is under assault, and when September 11th, I think the response was, and you touched on this, Mike, in the United States, it's to infringe on our liberties, whereas you said the French response was exactly the opposite, to go after the perpetrators immediately.
Yeah.
And we didn't do that. We dithered and then invaded sometime later.
Paris is it's one of the world's great cities, unquestionably. And one of the things, maybe the thing that makes it great, is that in that picture, that cartoon illustrates it. Paris is a city of neighborhoods. There's a downtown in a way, but the various arrondissements all have their the neighborhood butcher, their neighborhood pharmacist, and it's the kind of thing that we say we like in the United States, but we have not configured our country or our cities.
Yeah, the little villages within the city. Each arrondissement, numbered of course, but many of them have their own little names by which the Parisians refer to them.
And that's their lives. There's as you might expect, a CBS News correspondent in Paris. Her name's Elaine Ciolino, and she said this on November 15th. That despite ISIS threats, and this is a quote from ISIS, to make Parisians even fear traveling to the market, Elaine Ciolino said, on Saturday and today, the greengrocers and butchers and cheesemongers on my shopping street, the Rue des Martyrs, were open for business. The mood was somber, but the routine of daily life went on.
I think it's important in defending our liberties, again, to sustain our humanity. And you're giving very concrete examples of that in the Parisian response. The reminders in the U.S., I think we need to recognize that we've participated in the past in regime change, which you referred to briefly, in the Middle East, and we bear some responsibility for destabilizing the region, which means that we also need to recognize that all refugees are not terrorists, that it may be a betrayal of who we are to ask Muslims to register, which I think is a proposal right now out there by Donald Trump. Our Constitution does not have a religious test, and that's fundamental to what America is about. So we need to use this as an opportunity to recall who we are as a people.
And we've got Jeb Bush trumping Trump, saying, let's have Christians only.
Yes.
We need to take a look at who we say we are. The fact of the matter is, this is being played by ambitious politicians in a very cheap and tawdry way. There is a 3-stage vetting system for refugees coming into this country that begins with the military, proceeds to the State Department, and ends with the Department of Homeland Security, each of which conduct their own screening. It's not as though Syrian refugees are going to be coming into this country completely unvetted. It's actually a lot more thorough than what goes on in France.
Sure. Sure, and but Trump and company would have us believe otherwise, that they're just going to arrive on a plane and then be given an apartment, and here they are. Where it's never been that way.
It's the old, be afraid, be very afraid. And we ought to stop falling for it.
Yeah, we need to not take that bait.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good way to get into the more global response to the attacks. Is this going to bring the United States and Russia together? Are they going to coalesce around this problem now that has been visited on two countries to do something about ISIS? Is this going to be an opportunity for us?
Yes and no. We allied with the former Soviet Union to fight and eventually defeat Nazi Germany. And it may be that a similar alliance is going to be necessary in order to defeat ISIS. That's the yes. The no, the danger here, I think, is that we are being asked to engage once again, right, in the Crusades, Rome versus Islam. And to the extent that we're being provoked to retaliate and thereby to perpetuate a cycle of violence, we need to be very careful about who our partners are and what our military intervention involves, and accompany it with continued diplomatic efforts. I have a quote from Noam Chomsky, if I may, who has said, everybody's worried about stopping terrorism. Well, there's a very easy way: stop participating in it. Yeah.
This is the tit for tat explanation. Is that valid, Mike? Is that what's going on here, or there's something else that's driving this?
Is what valid?
This you bombed our people, we're going to retaliate against you. And that could be on either side.
I have mixed feelings about that. I think the French did the right thing in retaliating, and I don't think they're through. But I do think that, and this begs your question to some extent, I admit, I do think that the responses need to be as surgical as they can possibly be. I know it's hard, but the engagement in civilian casualties ought to be minimized, and that really mitigates against bombing in any sustained way. I don't know that we ought to have troops in Syria. Russia has traditional interests there, or ambitions at least. We really don't. As Nancy said, we probably have some responsibility because the business with Iraq back in 2003 has done a lot to destabilize the region.
Well, Syria, has been a client of the Russians for some time,
yeah.
And up until recently, the idea was, I think, that they were defending the Assad regime for various reasons. Well, now with the bombing of the Russian airliner, this is this diverts their attention from protection of Assad to protection of their own people, or stopping larger threats, perhaps. And I'm thinking of ISIS here. Is that sufficient provocation for Russia their attention to be diverted to ISIS?
No.
Well, and just to be clear, I also think the French did the right thing with their immediate response, the airstrikes on Raqqa, which is an ISIS headquarters.
Right.
My concern is civilian casualties, the need for surgical strikes, and also that we need to recognize the effects of our drone program, which has made us hated in the region and is perpetuating, as I said, this cycle of violence intergenerationally, because not only killing civilians, but also killing children. So again, it's not sit back, it's not be soft on terrorism, it's make every effort not to perpetuate a cycle of violence and recognize our complicity in the instability in the region.
It's absurdly human, and not to take this too far afield, but in a lot of traditional cultures, including Islamic culture, but also Japanese, you know, if there's to be fighting, there's a matter of honor and doing it personally. And rifles is about as far as they're willing to go with the direct confrontation. Drones are as completely impersonal and indiscriminate as anything imaginable.
Well, every technological development in warfare has been decried as being more impersonal.
But there's the absurdity.
Right.
The end result is killing, no matter how you cut it, and without denigrating anyone's culture. It really comes down to style. That's the absurd part, I think.
Do you think the United States and Russia are going to be able to get together, regardless of what they decide? Is it possible for this kind of cooperation to occur in the Middle East between the two purported superpowers?
I'm very thankful that we have the president we do right now, rather than the Republican candidates we've been seeing, who would, I think, have us in another shooting war in very short order, maybe including shooting at the Russians. There's a large cast of Republicans out there who've never been near the military in any way, shape, or form, but are suddenly, very much expert in what at least they would do. I think it's the ultimate in talk is cheap.
Let's bring our conversation home now, particularly to North Carolina in particular, and talk about the University Chancellor's salary flap. A couple of weeks ago, the Board of Governors gave the majority of the chancellors, 12 out of 17, substantial raises, unbidden, ranging from about 8% to about 19%, so there's quite a range in there. There's been some discussion about who got them, who didn't, the differing amounts, the way the salary discussions were unfolded, largely in secret. We've seen this before with our Board of Governors in the search process for a new president, and now we're seeing it again, or have just seen it again, with the chancellor's salaries. Isn't this public business that should be treated as such?
Yes. I mean, I think there are two problems here. One is we have open meetings laws in the state, and I understand that the Board of Governors is now going to engage in a process of re-education on government transparency regulations. That has been called for. That's a good thing. But the flip side of that is we don't want transparency to become legislative interference in the UNC system via the requests for records from the Board of Governors. And so there's a balancing act that I think needs to happen here. And the Board of Governors has now released, as I understand it, information on that closed meeting to the legislature, minutes, and apparently it was also taped. So hopefully we, the public, who are paying for the UNC system, will get some of that information, as well as the salary figures, which have been made public, but we don't know the process.
No.
Several thoughts, and forgive me for sounding cynical. I plead guilty. First of all, any education at this point is no more than closing the door after the livestock have left. And I really don't believe that they get it. And I have a couple of comments here from from the legislative, the testimony before the Joint Legislative Committee. And the other thing is that we need to remember that the legislature approved these people who are on the Board of Governors. I don't think there's that much of a disconnect between these two groups. I'm not sure the legislature would have ever acted on this, except it became so public and generated outrage. The acting chair of the Board of Governors said on Wednesday, and this is a quote, "I think we made an error," unquote, in not having the vote be public. The very next day, there was this from the same gentleman. We've got a lot of important things to do on this board to have so much controversy over the question of whether or not we did something in closed session or open session, unquote. I don't think that they really get it. And beyond that, I think that insofar as they do, they're not really interested in openness, despite them actually having said that, yes, I'm for openness.
Oh, we saw that. This isn't the first time we've seen that. You know, we talked about this a week or two ago about the search process for Margaret Spellings, the presidency. Was conducted in secret. That divided the Board of Governors. The search committee apparently cut out the rest of the board. Now we're seeing again that there actually was division in the vote for the chancellor's salaries. It was pretty close. It was 16 to 13. The Board of Governors usually acts as a unit. But lately we have seen the division there, as well as the division between the Board of Governors and the General Assembly.
Two other things quickly. One is that the concern expressed that led to the raises is that they want to keep North Carolina competitive in hiring and retaining chancellors. There's no evidence that I can have seen of any problem in that regard. And here's the other thing. If the idea is that more money will somehow buy greater talent, I don't think we have to look any farther than Charlotte and the banking community and the performance of people like Ken Lewis in the coming of the Great Recession. And finally, the 8% raise was the minimum to chancellors who got them.
19 the top.
Since 2008, from legislative funding, raises for faculty in the UNC system do not total 8%. A study of the period since 2008 indicates that faculty in the UNC system in general have lost 10% or better of their buying power in that period. And here are these enormous raises for already well-paid people.
I'll just add quickly, it's the timing that's shameless, right? It followed immediately the selection of Spellings, and so it looks very much like an attempt to court chancellors to support that decision.
And the ongoing hollowing out of the quality of education in North Carolina.
Yeah.
We talked about the no evidence that chancellors needed this big raise. We've seen, though, evidence, I think, that faculty, not just that the numbers have been so small, but there has been fallout from that. There have been a number of faculty who have left all the campuses due to these tight fiscal policies that the Board of Governors and the legislature has followed in recent years. Of course, tight fiscal policies when you're talking about faculty, not when you're talking about Margaret Spellings.
I think it's part of the plan. I think they want to reduce the number of full-time faculty in favor of adjuncts, distance learning, educational software, all of which goes to diminished quality for the children of North Carolinians once they enter the UNC system. And add that more and more is being turned over to the community colleges where the level of quality is very spotty. There are some very good community colleges, and there are some places that where the degree is not as represented. If we have a new president of the UNC system, let's start with some accountability right there. What's the product that is coming from the initiatives that have been generated by this legislature, this Board of Governors, and these decisions to go to these new policies, which take away from traditionally excellent education, higher education in North Carolina.
Well, that's key. It's dismantling one of the great public university systems in the United States.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly what's going on.
And it's all about the money, that reluctance to increase taxes, to maintain a great system.
It's not only that. It's the decisions about where the money that is available is being spent, including within the education budget itself. More and more of it's going to overhead. I think most taxpayers in this state would rather see their kids have smaller classes with well-educated people in front of their kids, engaging them in real thinking instead of performing some rote exercises with a computer.
That's certainly the ideal. That's our program for this week. You can reach us with your questions and comments at watchapptv.com. Please join us next time. I'm Paul Gates.